Hi everyone, here's another video. This video is going to be about Flexbox. Flexbox is a CSS property or a group of properties which you can use to help you create web page layouts. Last week we worked on a small web page, and also in your homework you worked on a web page. I'm not sure how it went in your homework, but for example in what we did last week, we created a simple page, but it didn't have any sort of structure where things were next to each other yet. So maybe I can take the news website I created. If you look at it, the Amsterdam Times, it's just one column, the whole website. And then there's a title and it has some things below each other, but nothing is next to each other. And of course, an important part of having a nice web page is that it divides all the elements of the web page nice over the space it has. If you, for example, look at the New York Times, we'll see that it's not just one column with information. It has a lot of things here next to the menu, for example. It has items next to each other. Then all these different items of news items, they are next to each other and above each other, and they create columns and columns in columns. So this video I would like to explain a bit how can we do that and how can we do that using Flexbox. In your homework, I think you will also learn other ways to do this, but let's talk about this later. So first, Flexbox. Flexbox, as I said, it's part of CSS. It's relatively new. When I was learning web development about 8 to 10 years ago, it didn't even exist yet. You couldn't use it. So I think it's been possible to use it for maybe 5 or 6 years now. And especially the last few years, all the browsers support it. So now it's very nice to use it because it doesn't, it works everywhere. So maybe let's first look at something I use quite often, is a Flexbox cheat sheet. Because Flexbox, it has a couple of CSS properties which you can use to arrange things on your page, but sometimes there are quite some properties, so it's easy to sort of get lost and not know which one to use when. So I want to show this sort of cheat sheet on csstricks.com. It's very nice. It kind of explains when to use which properties to get a certain effect. So here it tells you, okay, if you use this, then this happens. If you want your things to wrap, then use this. How can you align the items and stuff like that. It's all explained here in this sort of cheat sheet. So I would really encourage you to use this if you're going to use Flexbox. It just makes it a lot easier. Then I would also just like to show you Flexbox. So I would like to make a small website which has some more structure in it where things are next to each other. And I just would like to show how I would make this, and hopefully you can learn something from it. And I will also try to use Git while doing this, so that you see how I use Git in my normal flow when I create a website. So first of all, what we've been doing all the time is we first open git bash or the terminal on Mac. Let's make it a bit bigger. I go into my Hack Your Future folder, and here, let's see, there are some repositories already, some folders. So I'm going to create a new folder, and we're going to call it Flexbox News. Flexbox News website. So I create a new folder, then I go into this folder by typing cd and an FLE and a tab to autocomplete it. So now I'm into this folder and it's currently empty. So let's first create an HTML file. Let's create a CSS file and then open Visual Studio Code here. So as you noticed, I now first created the files and I didn't make it a Git repository yet. So you don't have to have an empty folder to create a Git repository, but you'll see that in a bit. So I now have this HTML. I'm going to use some HTML which I already prepared for this because I don't want to bore you with looking at how I am writing HTML. So here's some HTML which I will explain a bit. Let's add a CSS file. Create a link. rel is style sheet. href is style.css. We save that, and just to make sure that the style sheet works, we say the background of the body is red. Then we save that. Then in git bash I type explorer dot to open it in the file explorer, and I drag the index.html to my browser. So the CSS is working clearly. This is very bright. Yeah, and there's some HTML. Let's just remove this red background. It's a bit too much. All right, so we have some HTML here. Oh yeah, now I'm forgetting one image, which I'm just quickly gonna steal here. There's this beautiful piece of nature. Did you know that this nature is actually here in the Netherlands, in the dunes, close to Schorl? I could highly recommend you to check it out. It's very beautiful. Okay, so we have some HTML. Let's walk through this HTML first. Well, you know all the standard HTML, and then on this page there's a header. And the header, it has a navigation, but it also has this. And this is the logo. Maybe we can also give it a class logo just to make that a bit more clear. And maybe it could be a div actually, not a span. So TAT is the Amsterdam Times. And then a navigation, and these are both in the header. Then we have a main part. The main part has an article. This is a news article, and then it has an A site. It has a sidebar, and in this sidebar there's some other news listed. So there's a list with some news items from some other news items. And then there's a footer where it is the text. So as this HTML structure already suggests, there are two places where we have to put content next to each other. We want the logo to appear in the top left and the menu in the top right. So these two will have to appear next to each other. And if you look currently in the page, they are below each other. Also the menu items, they are currently below each other and they should be next to each other. Then we also have the article and the sidebar. We want them to be also next to each other. So these things we're going to try to do with Flexbox. But first I'm going to save this HTML and the CSS. And then in Git, I'm going to make the Git repository and make my first commit. Because currently I added like my initial HTML, and I'm now going to change this HTML. So I first want to make sure I save all these files, so that if I make a mistake, I can always go back to how it was before. So I can say here git status, and then we will actually see this is not a Git repository because I didn't run git init yet. So I can here run git init. Then it created the Git repository in this folder. If I now say git status, it tells me these three files, the HTML, the image, and the CSS, they are untracked. So I can say git add dot, and then git status, and then I see, all right, these three files are ready to be committed. Then I do git commit, the commit message, initial HTML plus an image plus empty style sheet. Or maybe even better is initial HTML for the Flexbox news website. It's always best to be as descriptive as possible, but not to make it too specific. So I committed this. Now git status, there's nothing changed, so I'm good to go to start changing. Should start changing some things. So let's just first focus on the header. What I would like with the header is that the Amsterdam Times logo is in the top left and the menu is in the top right. So let's start by doing, also I'm going to give the body a font family of Arial because it's a bit more pretty. I'm going to give the header a background color just because it looks nice. So that's that, and then maybe the logo, so the header logo, I give it a font size of 3 rem and a font weight bold, so that it looks more like a logo. Yeah. So now I want them to appear next to each other. For that I can say header, in the header property I can give it a display flex. This is how you sort of enable Flexbox in an element. So, and then what Flexbox does by default is that it makes a row. So from the left to the right, it will put all the elements which are in this element, it will just put it next to each other, and they will go as much to the left as they can. So currently we have the logo and then straight next to it this small menu. But of course I want the logo to be in the left and the rest in the right. So then there is a Flexbox property for that called justify content. And then in justify content I can say flex end. I'm wrong. Now they are both going to the end. It's maybe not about justify content. No, I lost it actually. We say justify content, then there's no. Let's use the cheat sheet. I should not even try to do this by heart. So I want the space between so that these elements go to the left and to the right. So it is a property for justify content, and I just say space between. If we then look at it, yes, the logo is in the left and the menu in the right. That's exactly what I wanted. Then I would also like the menu items to be next to each other. So for that I could also say header.nav display flex. So then we have a Flexbox in a Flexbox, but that's fine. And then it doesn't work, and that is because I now give the navigation element, I give it a display flex, but there's only one element in it, which is the UL. So I should actually give the UL a display flex. And then they appear next to each other. But now they're also very hard to read and they're all completely together. So what I then can do, I can give the A element, so the element which we can click, the link, we can give it some padding. So that there's some more spacing around it. And then these little dots, we would like them to disappear because they are part of the list, of the unordered list, the UL. So we can here say list style none, so that it doesn't show those dots. And there you have a first small menu. And now we see here that the spacing between home and about and contact is a bit bigger than between contact and the border. That's because there's 2 times 15 pixels here. So we can add some extra margin right to the UL, also 15 pixel. That should solve that. Yeah. So now we have a nice menu here and a logo here. Let's add some spacing to the header so that it's a bit more clear. So this all looks very good. I'm gonna make the logo even not even font weight bold, but give it a 900. I think then it becomes very bold. Yeah. Oh, but now we also see that the logo, it's here in the center, but the menu went a bit to the top. And for that, there's also a flex property called align items, and I think we can just say align items center. Yeah, and there the menu, it went to the middle. So justify content is about how the things are ordered over the row, over horizontally, and align items is about how things are aligned vertically. So now we have a nice header with a logo and a menu. And now you might notice there's this white border around the header. So I would like to remove that. And this is because the body, it has, by default, it has a padding or a margin. And something which is good to do in general is to say in the beginning, when we are starting with the development of a website, we just give everything a margin 0 and a padding 0. It's sort of a safe thing to do because sometimes the defaults per browser, they are a bit different. I'm not sure if this is true, but it could be that in Firefox, the default padding of the body is 10 pixels, but maybe in Safari, it's 20 pixels. And if you don't have the same value everywhere, then it could be that your website looks different on different operating systems. And you would not want this. So a quick one is to just do this. There's also an option to download a CSS reset. This is like a lot of different CSS properties, and then they all get set to a nice default value. But this is an easy way to do it in this case. So now that border is gone, then the next element is to put the article and the sidebar. I would like to put them next to each other. So for that, we use the article element, the A side element, and the main element is going to be the Flexbox element. So the main, we say display flex. Let's see what happens then. So now the article is here, and then the sidebar is there. This almost already looks like what we want. Let's see what happens. If we make the browser window a bit smaller, then the sidebar gets completely squeezed. And we don't want this. We want the sidebar to always be a certain size. So for this, we can say main.aside, so that's the sidebar. And we can say flex grow. We can put it on 0 so that it doesn't grow. We can also say flex shrink. We put it on 0 so that it doesn't shrink. Before we saw that it shrank because it became a bit less white, and we don't want this. And then flex basis, we can say, for example, 300 pixels. This makes the sidebar always 300 pixels. But we do see that it doesn't shrink nicely in the whole thing. Now, I don't exactly know why, but it could be because we have to say that the image should have a max width of 100%. Maybe that helps. Oh, yeah, and then we see that the image nicely shrinks together with the Flexbox columns. And now we also see that the sidebar, it's always a certain width, and the article, it scales depending on how big the browser window is. That's exactly what I was looking for. So let's just quickly give it some nice styling as well. Main A side URL. So I give the list items of the sidebar, I give them a bit of a padding bottom. Then there's an H2 in the sidebar, which should also have a padding bottom. There we go, and maybe the whole thing should also have some padding. And then the main article, I would also like it to have some spacing on the right. So that's already a bit better. And I would like to use this container, which I also used in the other CSS demo, so that the page is never wider than maybe 1000 pixels or so. And this is something which is a bit harder now, because now we have this header which is covering the whole top. Because last time what we did is we just put here around the whole page, we did div class is container, and then it was around all the HTML on the page, and then we said in CSS container max width 1000 pixels. And we added a margin 0 auto to make it go to the center. And now you see that then it looks a bit strange because the header is not continuing on the sides. So what we have to do in this case is to put it around the different elements we want to align. So the header should actually be full width, but then we put the container around the content of the header. And we also put it around the main part. This can shrink completely. And the footer, maybe we also want to give it a color, so we also only put it around the content. Oh, but now we see that this Flexbox here, it's broken. Now the logo is above the menu again, although the menu is still next to each other. So what's happening there? Yeah, and this is because the header, it has a display flex, and now the container is becoming part of the Flexbox. So we should not give the header anymore the display flex, but we should give this to another element. So we can make another element in the container called a div with a class header inner, for example. And then there we put the Flexbox on. We could also choose to do this on the container, but this is of course a bit dangerous, because if you put this on a container, it could also be applied to all other containers on the page, and you wouldn't want this, or you accidentally overwrite something in your container, but your container should be something you can reuse every time, everywhere, and it should not be influenced by other things, by other CSS properties of other elements. So this is nice already. Let's also give some spacing to the article, or to main maybe. Margin top of 30 pixels. And then in the article we can give the H1 a font size of 4 and font weight 900, and a margin bottom of 30 pixels. It's very big. And I think the paragraph, it should have a line height of 1.5. And a margin bottom of 15 pixels. There we go, and then the footers just need some styling, and then I think it looks quite nice already. So maybe also this, we can give a background color and some padding so that it doesn't look so cramped. And I guess it should be text align center. And some margin top 30 pixels to give it some spacing so that it's not completely on the article. So here we have a simple news website, which already looks a bit complexer than the one we had before, which was just a column. But now we have a nice logo and a menu in a header. Then we have an article with an image and a title and some text, and on the sidebar we have some other news items. And if we scale the browser window, they also nicely scales along. The article gets a bit smaller, but the sidebar stays there nicely. And the footer in the bottom. We do see though, if we make the browser window very small, at some point it just stops scaling. That's already interesting. This is because the happening, it's such a big word that Flexbox, it just thinks, okay, I can't scale this anymore, so I will just stop here. But you also see that, well, this is still fine, but if I make the H1 of the article a bit smaller, then you will see that the article, it can get really small, and then it gets really hard to read. There's only 3 or 2 words per sentence. So then there are better ways to do this, but that's something for next week. Then we're going to talk how to make your website good on mobile, if I am right. It's actually part of this week. Oh, I was not aware of that either. So then we should maybe also still talk about media queries. Yeah. So in your reading material, you actually already read about media queries, but let me then also quickly demo this. So a media query is a way to say if the browser window is so small that most likely it's a mobile phone, So we could say here, maybe for the article, we want to make some specific rules. Where am I? So I could add a media query here. So I could say media, and then if the max width is 512 pixels, for example, then I want the main element. I want to change the direction of the flex. So a Flexbox element, it can either be, let's see if they have a demo. It can either go from left to right, it could go from right to left, but it can also go from top to bottom or bottom to top. What we've now been using all the time is from left to right. So all the menu items, they go, the header is from left to right, the menu items are from left to right. But we could now choose that if we are on mobile, that this other news, that it goes below the article. So then we could say that we changed from the main, we changed the flex direction and we changed it to column. If we then refresh the page, nothing happens. This is because this only works when the browser is not bigger than 512 pixels. And currently it's, I don't know, 3000 pixels. Here you see it already. So if I scale down, it's still next to each other, but then at some point, bloop, it jumps below the article. And so now the browser window, it's smaller than 512 pixels. This is a bit unhandy way to do it. A better way is to open your browser tools. So you can either do right click, inspect element, or you could do F12 on your keyboard. Then put the developer tools to the right. I think I'm zoomed in a bit. Yeah. And then there is an option here to click on a mobile phone. Toggle device. And then here we can, in the menu item, we can choose that you, for example, want to see what it looks like on an iPhone 6. And then also here we can see how wide this then is in pixels, so 375, and how high this screen is. And now we see that it nicely, that it was nicely put below. And let's see how it looks like on an iPad. And on an iPad, it's next to each other. And I think that's still quite okay. We do see though that now the screen is so small that the article, it completely goes to the border of the screen. This is of course not so nice. So we can maybe add a padding to the article. A padding left of 15 pixels. So that's a bit easier to read. And then on the iPhone, it should also look a bit better. Yeah, exactly. And then now there's still more spacing on the right than on the left. And that's actually because we have a margin right of 30 pixels and a padding left of 15 pixels. So maybe it's better to say we just do a padding of 15 pixels on the left and the right. So for that I could either write padding left 15 pixel, padding right 15 pixel. But the shorter way to do this is to say padding 0, 15. Then the 0 is for the top and the bottom, and the left and the right is the 15 pixel. Another way to do it is to say padding 0, 15 pixel, 0, 15 pixel. Then this first one is the top, this is the right, this is the bottom, and this is the left. But then this is the shortest one. And then maybe margin right, we make it 15 pixel. Because when there is two columns, it's still nice to have some extra spacing. But then on a mobile phone, we remove this. So we say main article margin 0. And then if I now refresh, it should have a nice spacing everywhere, which is the same. All right, this looks good. I wonder why there is so much spacing here. That's because this article is very big. And this is most likely because it tries to be as big as the other column. So there's two in the Flexbox, there's now two elements. It's the article and it's the sidebar. And they want to have the same height, most likely. Although they are not really the same height, so I'm a bit confused by this. But I wonder if we disable this explicitly, that maybe it already changes. Yeah, so we have align items, and then we can say flex start, but I think that's the default. No, it's not that. I understand already. So we added a flex basis of 300 pixels. Let me remove this because this was not the solution. We added this flex basis of 300 pixels so that the column would always be 300 pixels wide. But if we change the flex direction, then it's not about the width of the column anymore, then it's about the height of the column. Because the flex basis is just about the direction of the column and then how big it is in that direction. So maybe we should just not set the flex basis anymore when we are on a mobile phone. So instead of 300 pixels, we say auto, I think. And also the flex grow, it can go to 1, and flex shrink, it can stay on 0, because we don't want it to shrink. So this already looks a bit better now. It's not so high anymore. It's nicely underneath the article, and this looks pretty good on mobile. And then on the iPad, looks also good. It's a bit strange that the footer is not in the bottom, but I'm going to leave that for now. All right, so this we made this web page now with multiple columns. We did work on different devices. We made it all look good and be usable so that if somebody visits this website with another device than the initial one we developed it for, they can also easily read the content and use the website, which is of course very important. Then I think I want to show one more thing. If you have been using the HTML generation, so if you do HTML and you clicked on this thing, then you would have automatically this meta tag. And this meta HTML element, it's really important for mobile devices. If I remove this and I open the page on mobile, then you see that it doesn't really scale nicely. I can't really explain why, because it has some technicalities which I also don't know. But this meta tag, which is called viewport and has this content, it's very important for mobile phones and tablets so that the web page nicely scales down and that the text stays readable. In this way, it's more like how websites maybe were 5 or 10 years ago, that if you visit the website and it was not made for mobile, you always had to scroll around, and if you want to read a sentence, you have to go from left to right, or you have to zoom out a bit, but then it also becomes harder to read. Okay, that doesn't work. That it also becomes harder to read. So always include this meta tag, which is automatically included if you use the auto completion, but if you don't do that, make sure it's there in case things look strange. All right. And now I realize I completely forgot to commit anything. This is the danger with Git. I also still have this problem that sometimes you're working so much on something, and especially now I'm recording a video, that you easily forget that you also have to commit sometimes. So of course I can now add these changes and commit them. Add style sheet to make website for website layout and responsive design. So now I've committed my work, but it would have been better if I would have committed, for example, once I created the header, to then commit it, and then do the article and the sidebar, and then commit it, and then make it work on mobile, and then commit that, so that you have multiple save points throughout the whole time you are working on this website. And now I only have my initial HTML and when the website is completely done. So if I now made a mistake somewhere and I would want to go back to a version which was in between those two, it would not be possible. So you can blame me for that. That's not a good example of how to do it. But sometimes you learn more by seeing people do it wrong, right? Then with that, I want to close off this video. So we learned how to use Flexbox to create a web page layout and also how to make it responsive. And then I would also like to emphasize again that with CSS, it's just very important to use it a lot and to also Google and see what kind of properties there are and how you can use all these things. Also, to make a website more responsive, there are other ways which can help. I think they are in your reading material, but otherwise, over time you will learn more about them, and it will become easier and easier. And that was Flexbox. Thank you for watching, and see you either on Sunday. Bye.